So here's an interesting little title we're going to be looking at today. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters for the original Nintendo Entertainment System. This was essentially Konami's take on the whole Street Fighter II craze that ran rampant back in the early 1990s. I remember a friend of mine having a copy of this game back in high school, and we used to play the heck out of it while all the other kids were banging SF2 on their Super Nintendos. Speaking of which, Tournament Fighters also saw release on the Super NES and Sega Genesis consoles, but those are totally different games sharing the same name and nothing else. The NES version is the only one we're going to be looking at today, so let's get to it. So the story behind Tournament Fighters on the NES is that Eternal Turtles antagonist Shredder has somehow kidnapped Master Splinter and placed him in a box, and subsequently challenges the Turtles to a duel. Rather than concoct some elaborate plan to rescue their master, the Turtles opt to fight each other in a tournament-style competition to see who gets the fight Shredder. Yeah, because that's how it always worked in the comics and the TV show and the movies and whatnot. Yeah, it's not the deepest narrative ever conceived, but whatever, it's something. There's a couple game modes you could tackle in Tournament Fighters, aside from the main story mode, which only lets you play as the 4 Turtles. You also have a versus player, the 2-player mode, versus CPU, the match against the computer. Thank you, Captain Obvious. And a tournament mode that lets you and 3 other people participate in a mini tournament, which is kind of neat. Story mode only allows you Story mode only allows you to pick one of the 4 turtles, but all other modes gives you access to all 7 characters in the game. So in addition to the turtles, you also have Shredder, Casey Jones, and an anthropomorphic dragon named Hothead, whose appearance is inspired by the warrior dragon character from the old TMNT Adventures comics from Archie Comics from way back when. Bonus points for you if you actually remember those comics. That was the shit back in the day. For a game console with only 2 buttons and not much power behind it, the NES could do a fighting game just fine. The controls respond fairly well in each of the fighters while lacking in a huge arsenal of attacks. Actually, each fighter only has 1 or 2 special moves at most, with an additional projectile attack that can be used when one picks up a red ball. No, really, you pick up a ball and you shoot it in different ways. It's all the... In any case, they control well enough with what they got. I generally don't like the idea of picking up a red ball to throw a projectile attack, but it certainly minimizes the fireball fights in this game, and the fights do get interesting as you struggle with your opponent for control of the red ball of doom. Although it does seem a bit limiting in comparison to other games of the genre, one has to keep in mind that this is an old system which doesn't often produce these types of games. If ever, given what they had to work with, it's at least competently done, and competently done rather nicely, all things considered. You have 3 different skill settings to choose from, each with varying degrees of difficulty. You could also tweak the speed of the fighting and the amount of time per round if you so desire. All in all, I found the AI to be fairly competent, giving me a good fight when, at times, and never had a moment where I felt cheated or had the need to smash my controller, which is a good thing. If you want the full ending in story mode though, you have to play this on hard, just saying. Now you probably noticed by now that the fights contested in Tournament Fighters are presented in something of a widescreen type of format, with the life meters adoring the top bar and the classic TMNT logo on the bottom. Looks a bit weird at first that it's not filling up the screen, but it's not that big of a deal or anything. The fights cover enough of the screen that it's not much of a nuisance or distraction, and the 4 stages themselves are pretty well designed, with 2 of them employing some parallax and perspective, which is a nice touch, and something that wasn't necessary per se, but they did that, and it does show that Konami wanted to make the very best game possible here. It's a rather nice touch. Otherwise, Tournament Fighters looks pretty good. The turtles look pretty decent despite being palette swaps of the same turtle sprite, and the rest of the fighters look solidly designed. You can make out who's who, and that's a good thing. There is some flicker here and there's some bouts of slowdown that could slow the game to a crawl at times, which kind of explains why you can't have 2 hotheads fighting each other unless you circumvent the system, of course. But otherwise, everything looks about as good as it gets. Nothing to complain about here. Generic sound all around plagues Tournament Fighters on the NES. The soundtrack to this game is really nothing special here. It is typical high-quality Konami stuff, but not quite memorable high-quality Konami stuff. Certainly does not stand out from some of the company's past NES efforts with great musical compositions. This is merely adequate at best. And the cheering sounds whenever you attain a victory, a nice touch marred by low-tech sound processors. I just can't get around the scratchiness of some of the sound clips, the voice clips. You know what? They tried to produce something decent with what they had. For the most part, they succeeded. It's just nothing really special at all. Overall, I have to give kudos to Konami for braving it out and attempting to bring a semblance of the fighting game pie over to the NES during the last legs of its lifespan. If you're going to compare this iteration of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters to other fighting games of the time, then obviously it's not going to be as good as those fighters, that goes without saying. But taking into consideration the limitations of the NES, Tournament Fighters is as good as fighters you're going to get on a system which was believed to be incapable of handling any game in the genre, and is the closest thing you're going to get to having an official fighting game on the console, unless you were to count the pirate ports of Street Fighter 2, which are about as well refined in play mechanics as a turd smells like a rose. Tournament Fighters is a generally hard beast to find, and I can imagine it carrying a fair price these days. But it is definitely worth a shot if you own an NES, you like Turtles, you like fighting games, and you want to play one on the console that's actually pretty decent and yards better than Urban f***ing Champion. Bottom line, it's surprisingly well done, it's enjoyable, and it's a really nice effort overall. It won't replace the latest Capcom fighter anytime soon, but it's still a damn fine effort. Good stuff.